He was standing at that moment when we all, unfortunately for us, at some point collide with reality, the moment when our goals, hopes, and dreams collide with reality. Standing in the foyer, Elliot Smalling listened to the sounds of his wife's vigorous sex in the bedroom a floor above and realized that his marriage had just killed itself. Elliot remembered what she'd said to him the last time, "We're fine. I just need some time alone." It brought to mind the constant argument he, an advertising copywriter, had had with himself many times about the nature of words. He trusted his wife's words because he wanted to believe that beyond the bump in the road there was a path to the good life he had always envisioned. But deep down he knew that just as sex can be divorced from love, so words can be divorced from meaning, allowing two people to say different things with the same words. Elliot believed that her lies were designed to keep him in the dark so that he could become her unwitting support system, like an ant infected with Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, a fungus that takes over the insect's brain and forces it to climb as high as possible so that the parasite can release its spores, killing the ant in the process. He recalled Tom Wolfe's insight. Evolution was completed when man had speech. Once he became not Homo sapiens, man of reason, but Homo loquax, man who speaks. Speech gave man much more than an ingenious tool. Speech became a veritable nuclear weapon. It endowed man with the powers of reason, sophisticated memory, and long-range planning, which eventually evolved into printing and engineering plans. It reminded him of Hamlet's words to Polonius when questioned about what he was reading: words, words, words. They could mean something, or they could simply be a means to an end, forcing someone to follow a plan that would be to their detriment. Well, thought Elliot, that had clearly happened. He was a beta man paying for a house in which his wife was fucking an alpha stud, as the saying goes, alpha fucks, beta fucks. Karl Marx would say that time is money, which meant she was stealing from him the only non-renewable resource in his life, his time. Unlike most men in men's fiction who rage, drink, and beat people up, or women in women's fiction who cry, blame themselves and go on introspective journeys to figure out where they went wrong, he just felt the loss. What might have been a good thing was now ruined forever. Even if he took her back, he wouldn't be able to forget, wouldn't be able to trust her words anymore and appreciate her the way he used to. She'd discovered something ugly in herself that she decided to give the upper hand to out of selfishness. He leaned against the stair railing for a moment, all energy and light had left him, and he felt empty. It seemed to him that the workday had dragged on. Now he had to sort through this mess and avoid damaging his constituents, their 3 children in common, because, having grown up in the midst of the divorce epidemic among boomers, he knew that divorce destroyed not only families but also children, usually leading to drug and alcohol problems and other self-destructive behaviors throughout adulthood. When a sweaty Marina Smalling opened the master bedroom door to buy refreshing soft drinks for herself and her lover, she found her husband in full business attire standing in front of a whiteboard. "What the hell?" she said, but then caught herself thinking. "Elliot, this isn't what it looks like. It's..." Her husband held out his hand. "Send the meat puppet home and we'll talk." Her lover, in whom Elliot recognized one of the more outspoken volunteers from the nature center where she'd spent much of her free time over the past 2 years, hurriedly withdrew, casting a fleeting glance over her shoulder. Elliot pointed to a whiteboard with writing on it. L equals P2/R. In this case, L is the probability that someone will take a certain action, R is the risk, and P is the reward. The payoff is squared, it's a power law, and divided by the risk. When the risk is too high, unless the payoff is astronomical, people avoid acting. But if the payoff is huge and the risk is small, we start acting. This tells me that you view the loss of your marriage as either a low risk or an easy loss. Elliot took a deep breath. "I believe this is mostly a result of the divorce laws in our state," he said. "If we divorce, you get the kids, child support, alimony, maintenance, and half of everything I own, including my business. That gives you an incentive to cheat, which I hope is balanced by your desire to stay with me and live a happy life together until the end of time. Mathematically, it tells us that you no longer seek that prospect and either want to find a way out or want me to take a lesser role, such as cuckold. In any case," he said, "it means to me, as a man and a human being, that you no longer expect my society. If I died tomorrow, you wouldn't lose anything, would you? It would be the same if I just packed up and left. Sure, you'll miss me when you need to mow the lawn, pay the bills, entertain the kids, or grease the back door, but other than those mundane daily chores that any man can do, you'll do just fine on your own. Elliot, began Marina. Take my advice, don't. Anything you say now is statistically likely to be a lie. He pointed to the board. You can see here the 4 possible uses that face us now. Take heed, if you will. Zenotation spot violation, you cheat, I stay, feel violated, and retaliate. Zenotation spot reconciliation, you stop cheating, I stay, and there is a breakdown of goodwill here because trust has been lost. Zenotation spot marriage dissolution, you cheat, I leave, the children suffer the most, but there is no dishonesty. Zenotation spot merger, you cheat, I cheat, and we give the kids a normal home, but no longer rely on trust. As you know, Elliot said, I've tried not to bring my work mentality into our home. I really dislike people who treat their wives and children as co-workers or contractors. There's something creepy about it from Brave New World and Star Trek, a kind of bourgeois convenience that blends technological consumerism with Soviet functionalism. I guess that's the trend of the post-war world. But you have to choose one of those paths. I'll stop, Marina said quickly. Elliot paused. That was too fast, he said slowly. It wouldn't be the first time, would it? She shook her head and her tears flowed. Just no tears, please, Elliot said, holding out a handkerchief to her. I'm going to treat you like an adult, and I'm going to assume that you made these decisions for a purpose, which means you were getting something you wanted out of it. Surely such momentous decisions can't just be an emotional reaction, a tantrum, or some kind of self-expression, can they? You made a conscious choice. What's the number? It wasn't like that, Marina says. I was so bored. We climbed all the mountains. We sailed across all the seas. Now it's just everyday life. You grind at work, I take care of the kids, we go to Costco and argue about how much mayonnaise we can afford. It's just an emptiness that will drag on for the rest of eternity. What is there for me? There has to be more to life than family, there has to be adventure. I just needed. I wanted. I don't even know. Elliot looked her over from head to toe. The tears seemed real, but in that moment he had to remind himself that he shouldn't trust anything to his wife, who for some reason had become a liar, at least to him. It all comes down to means and ends, he said finally. Goals are objectives and means are what you use to accomplish them. Is your marriage an end in itself, or is it just a means to an end to make you feel like a complete person? Marriage is a 3-headed dog, legal, practical, and spiritual. He continued. Being married means giving up a lot to be near your man and together create something greater than each of us, a family, a nebula of love spreading to the farthest corners of the universe. If you treat marriage as a means rather than an end in itself, as a joining of souls into something greater, a gestalt if you will, you kill the spiritual component and it becomes a job like everything else. My work is a means to an end, but the end is what we have. We have. In our union and with our children. If we divorce, my parents will kill me, Marina said, wiping tears from her eyes with the flat side of her finger. We'll also lose half of everything, each of us, I mean. It will devastate the children. We'll have to move and make new friends, since we have quite a few. Option number 2. That's what I want, she said, looking at him straight on, but tucking her arms to her sides. Elliot looked at his wife and knew in his heart that this wasn't over. An invisible sigh ran through his body. Okay, so what do I get out of this? Not get divorced and lose half of what you own, including your company, Marina said slowly and calmly. The courts will make you sell it, you know that. You built this business on nothing. True, but what do I get for taking you back and forgiving this whole incident? You changed the terms of our contract, and there must be some compensation to induce me to agree to a new raw deal. I'll make it up to you somehow, Marina said hastily. Tonight. She smiled sweetly. There was a long silence. I want a contract after we get married, he said firmly. If either of us cheats in the future, they get nothing from the relationship and the alimony goes into a trust. The problem with reconciliation is that it's inherently reconciliation at all costs, or means beyond measure, which means that in order to preserve the marriage, we sacrifice the purpose of the marriage to achieve reconciliation. So I need to get something out of it, otherwise it will be one-sided. I'm not going to do that, she said. Society pities the victim, and women are seen as perpetual victims, so I'm going to win. Take it or leave it. With those words, she went down the hall to take the sheets off the master bed, wash them, then brush her teeth, spritz and rinse her mouth. This is how easy it will be to fix, she thought. She used the same tactic at work and in her volunteer life, and it would work here, too. Elliot knew otherwise. She was treating him like someone to dominate, not someone she cared about, and that meant she would do it again. He remembered being taught objectification in his political science class. If you want to dominate someone, you must first think of them as less than human, like rapists with their victims, Nazis with Jews, communists with knuckle-draggers, American Indians scalping settlers, and hippies spitting on soldiers returning from Vietnam. She saw him as subhuman, an object to be manipulated, not a being with a soul. Somehow love turned to hate. What had he done other than provide a cozy home? Perhaps too cozy, and that was why she was bored in trying to get attention with activism, commerce, and promiscuous sex. Either way, the marriage simply died as he saw the way she looked at him and knew he could never love her again. A sigh escaped him like a ghost from hell and he got in his car and drove back to his office. Like most functional men in his situation, he lost himself in his work. A few years ago, he and 3 other writers formed a consultant collective that hired advertising agencies around the country that needed fast, accurate, high-quality text that could be used in a variety of forms: print, web, voiceover, as well as scripts for commercials and salespeople. Basically, they took a campaign the firm already had, gave it new life, and then translated it for different niches. Nuvian, his firm's name is a portmanteau of the words renew, revision and alien, came about because Elliot noticed what he called the employee cycle. When a project was new, he rewarded innovators, researchers, and people willing to assemble the parts into a finished order. However, as soon as the project succeeded, a committee stepped in and undermined it with paradoxical goals that arose when each person on the committee had to make some sort of demands to stay relevant. The result was a mess that drove away competent employees, leaving companies with dying projects staffed by lazy idiots. His firm was floundering in the aftermath of a collapse. Floundering helplessly in a fast-moving market but unable to swim out under the weight of committees and incompetence, firms needed someone to throw them a lifeline, and they didn't care at all how much that person would charge, because anything less than the expected profit from the contract saved their bacon. Using his sources of information, Elliot would determine the maximum price that could be taken and go for it, which meant that he and his partners were making 5 times what they would have otherwise. Our job is to give people reasons to buy what they already want to buy, Elliot often told his employees. Most advertising is simply confirming desires with a pleasing image. So let's create that image and see if we can have fun doing it. For Elliot, copywriting was about linking aspirations to products. People had goals in life, and they wanted to believe they could solve them simply by choosing a product related to those goals. If you wanted to be a mountain bike racer, you bought a bike, clothes, tools, and a phone app. A good copywriter expanded that circle by showing people a desirable life full of desirable products, allowing them to take a leap of faith themselves. Advertising was based on a mixture of means over ends and ends over means. When you have a goal, you do whatever is necessary to achieve it, including buying the necessary goods. But most people, he believed that the bulk of his species existed at a cross between insanity, stupidity, and narcissism, tried to use the purchase of goods to signal the achievement of a goal. He did the same when his wife told him her story. "We're just going through a rough patch with you working so hard and spending all weekend tidying up the backyard," she purred in his ear. "Let me find something to do at the nature center, because there I can be someone important, helping humanity mitigate climate change like a patriotic hero, not just another housewife with her hands buried in dishes." At 39, with 3 happy children and a spacious house in the suburbs that looked like a pile of architectural ideas from old Europe turned into a comfortable and convenient retreat, Elliot had seen enough to realize how much illusion there was in this world. There wasn't so much cynicism in his gaze as appreciation for the pile of words that made it all function. Without patriotism, religion, technology, altruistic dogma, and sexual flattery, humanity would still be sitting in caves splitting coconuts with rocks. He hoped his marriage was above that. Eventually, he met her in a fairy tale novel. In college, having had their first taste of freedom but still dependent on the knowledge they had absorbed as children, the students split into different groups. The jocks stayed with each other, the theatergoers formed a brutal clique, the literary majors gathered in pretentious clubs at the local Viennese cafeteria, the nerds crowded around the TV with Star Trek and Star Wars, the business majors joined the ranks of the young Republicans, and everyone else felt the sting of a lack of identity. Elliot, who studied literature and was shocked by an accidental higher grade in an economics class, fluttered between the jocks and the nerds, communicating easily on a personal basis rather than relying on identity. Marina hovered above all of these groups. Sweet and kind, she was technically attached to her tribe of fellow business students, but spent most of her time with the nerds and politicians. With a mop of blonde hair, bright green eyes, and a pleasant contralto, slightly husky voice, she was a couple inches taller than most of the women in her class and spent a lot of time on the college golf team. Elliot had met her through a friend who knew her from a political group that opposed animal cruelty and wanted to bring attention to the issue. College life reduces socializing to its essence, partying, and reduces it to kegging and talking. Like college itself, it's a filtering process that separates those who socialize effortlessly from those who nervously gulp down cold natural light while trying to pretend to be interested in what's going on. Elliot, as usual, entered silently, so that everyone became aware of his presence only by his words. "You're the only thing that can save me from alcoholism," he said carelessly and, he hoped, absent-mindedly. He saw her as both a serious young woman dedicated to her career and a person lost and misguided by a fundamental disbelief in the goodness of the world. She socialized as she lived, talked to the rare people who interested her, but appeared mostly to say what she had so that later in life she would not regret what she had missed. She was boring to the point of recklessness, but constrained by her career focus, which told him that somewhere in the back of her mind she had a fear of the future. "Oh, you say that to all the pretty girls," she replied. "Then I wouldn't have said it to you." Elliot replied sharply. "You're several notches above merely pretty, and you look as dull as I do. What do you say we head out tonight?" She walked with him to the edge of campus, near the less fashionable east side of town, where they had gained access to the observatory thanks to the copy of the master key he had stolen. "Look at that night sky," he said. "The universe is so big out there, and that's just the visible part. We're so small, humans, just looking for a little warmth and comfort in this place too big for us to comprehend." From the way he regarded her, that image would confirm her worldview and give her some small hope of pleasure. He moved closer to her as they sat down. "It's a big world," Marina says. "I just want to be able to survive and not get discouraged until I die. I hope there's something magical out there, like fairies or unicorns, but every time I look at the economy, I see us as smart monkeys who adapt to the material world and everything else is fantasy." "But fantasy is the best part," Elliot says. "Having dreams, creating worlds. You have a beautiful mind, and there's more to you than just finding a place." "How would you know?" she asked playfully, her voice trembling and the question becoming more like a sing-song admonishment. "I attended one of your classes," he revealed. "I'm actually a wordsmith, but I like economics. Your parsing of the gold standard and modern monetary theory into one argument was inspiring. Something about public confidence in the economy being the real value of currency, tying that to both production and expectation management through media control." She asked. "And you were nice," he said quickly, as if embarrassed. The argument made sense, and I couldn't believe you had the guts to say it in front of old Shanahan, since he wrote a dissertation on the gold standard back in the Stone Age. Half the class wanted to lynch you for skewering their sacred cows for an impromptu barbecue, but then you did that smile, "See, you're doing it now," and said theoretically, and they loved you. It was magic, you seemed sincere while being insincere. She laughed. "And who are you?" he thought. "Insincere. I don't believe in anything. I think all the things we need to believe in aren't real. The things that are real are the things that we don't have to make ourselves believe, that we know in our gut and intuition, and we just know them because the world works the way our brains work." "God?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "In my heart I feel a presence there, but there's too much no. I.e. from my early experiences with the church. Organized religion is just selling bourgeois complacency. What about you?" "I think she's in there," she said. No, I don't. Probably leaning toward the affirmative. I believe in seeing, touching, smelling, hearing, tasting, and deriving supply-demand curves. Everything else is probably just people's wishes. They talked all night, sharing a bottle of wine he had brought with him, hidden in the bulky pockets of his camouflage pants. After that night, they started seeing each other regularly. After a few more months, they started seeing each other regularly, and the next semester, exclusively. She never mentioned him to her girlfriends or promised that he was the one. She wanted to do a little shopping, as an economist and as a woman who had seen the gimmicks of shiny but useless products at the grocery store. She had no idea what to think of Elliot, for he was unlike anyone from her family and past. Her paternal grandfather, like his father, had made a lot of money but then lost it, so her father had grown up in poverty and had somehow taken over her mother, who was equally a socialite family and unkempt newcomers from the countryside far outside the city. Her parents were government employees and spoiled her and her sisters. When you spend your days caring for others, there's nothing wrong with living well, her father had told her, his thin hands resting over the latest book on famine in Ethiopia or sweatshops in Malaysia. Marina emerged from the fog of family life the day she started her period. She lived in a world of what her parents wanted to buy for her, what they said in church and what she read in the newspapers, since she wanted to be either a journalist or a politician at the time. When she took her hand away from her groin with bright blood all over her palm and a dark clot of uterine tissue, she screamed and burst into tears. Breaking her cozy peace, nature came for her, the same nature that brought aging and death. From that moment on, she became a serious girl on her way to an independent life. She had always loved animals, so she chose veterinary medicine, but then she realized there was so much more to do behind the scenes, where the money was. She wanted to understand the world as it was, not as it appeared on the evening news or in her parents' chatter over coffee and donuts after Sunday school. This was when the problems in her parents' marriage began, and running away from home seemed justified. Thinking back to that time, she would always remember Gene, her first true love. She met him in her freshman year of university and immediately felt her heart racing. Tall, with dark wavy hair, he dominated her economics classes as much as he dominated her athletics competition. They began spending nights in his dorm room, and a sign hung on the doorknob warning roommates to stay away until dawn. She used the L word, and he reciprocated. Marina thought it was true love forever, until she came home one day and found out that Gene had transferred to another university. He didn't even tell her about it, and she only found out after he left. There was no arguing, only sadness remained. Her grades dropped for a semester, she watched a lot of sad movies, but by the next year her parents thought the relationship was over. In fact, it wasn't, and a cold emptiness settled in her heart, gnawing at her ego. She found a giant question mark in Elliot, which pleased him immensely. He seemed to dare her to care about him and take a chance on him, instead of settling for one of the win-win guys she knew from her economics classes or one of the bad boys from her activist activities. As graduation approached, however, she had to make a choice. She was going to move somewhere and get a job. Would she move alone, and if not, who would she take with her on her college date, from whom most people statistically choose their spouses? It's an economic decision, Elliot told his best friend Ray. She has several safe options and one good one. If she makes the good choice, she proves that she's willing to look at the long term, which means you can marry a woman like that, not just date her. Ray, who thought women were hilariously rude and was glad he was homosexual, grinned. But how do you know she's not just gaming the system by pretending to make tough choices, so you trust that signal more than her actual behavior? Marina sat with a glass of wine, she had just turned 21, at the small table she had at school and stared at the candle. She dated a lot and only slept with a few of them, because with the type of guy that pursued her, it meant some kind of commitment. She dated casually as well, meaning she'd meet a guy for coffee or drinks, including when she met Elliot regularly, but few of them lasted. She didn't need a trophy husband, but someone who would support her emotionally and give her a chance that she wouldn't get bored of him. Marina took a sip. The whispering voice in the back of her head told her that she also needed someone she could control, at least in the sense that he wouldn't ruin her career or their family for the sake of some vanity. Elliot, while not the prettiest or strongest, was willing to expose her to self-deception and was gracious in letting her make her own choices. He was maturing faster than the others, at least intellectually, she thought, and that made him a good choice. Did she love him? This brought her to the Socratic question, what is love in general? She thought it was the intersection of appreciation, respect, faith, hope, and probably biological compatibility. She and Elliot would have wonderful children, both of them with light brown hair with red in height, and those children would probably inherit their parents' IQs and be somewhere in the top 5% of society. She doubted the other men in her life and had long ago rejected most of them as contenders. It meant that she could decide to love Elliot because she believed that love, or at least the final step towards it, was a choice, even a leap of faith. He was the best option in her college years and therefore probably the best option she could find, and he could be a means to her goal of a comfortable, visible life. Deciding so, she lit one of her roommate's cigarettes and drank the rest of her wine before heading to his dorm room to see him. After delighting both parents, they had a church wedding and honeymooned in South Florida, affordably. He began a career as a copywriter for a major advertising firm, while she secluded herself in the house to produce offspring. The first of 3 children, Dale, Chris, and Elizabeth, kicked off 15 years during which Marina was a stay-at-home mom focused on raising the children until they reached adolescence and could mostly take care of themselves. At the end of this period, as is usually the case with writers, Elliot achieved career success later in life after being essentially one of the team for nearly 2 decades. His advertising writing style worked well with small clients, so after a few notable successes, he began working independently. Marina, feeling bored at home, took a job as a volunteer coordinator at a nature center, adopting the clothes and mannerisms of its staff, progressive Christianity, humanistic patriotism, free market economics, and lots of kombucha and patchouli. "Honey," he said one night after dinner a few years later, when the kids had run off to their rooms to do homework or play video games but insisted they were doing their homework. "We need to talk." "What?" Marina said. "We're drifting apart," Elliot said. "You're lingering at home. I'd like us to get back to being one for each other and spending time here instead of other places, like the office." "It's unreal," she said. "We raised 3 kids together and had 2 careers together. People just get tired. Let me do things my way and I'll come back to you like I always have." "It's very realistic," Elliot says. "We choose love and family. It will last as long as we want it to, but we have to make sure our desires don't tempt us with easier options. That's what marriage is all about, giving up a lot to get one really good thing." "There's nothing wrong with our marriage," Marina objected. "It's a perfectly normal marriage. The fact is that I'm tired, a vacation won't fix that, and I need to take time to discover myself through work and a social life." "A pretty normal marriage?" Elliot said. He put aside the book he was reading, Bobos in Paradise, The New Upper Class and How They Got There. "All marriages are just normal at best," Marina said. "I'm not the prettiest girl in the world or the sexiest slut, so I don't expect you to feel that way about me." "That's too bad," Elliot said. "I don't know who the best person in the world is because I'm not comparing you to anyone. You're the person I fell in love with from the beginning, and I want us to have an amazing life together. If we're a little tired, that means we need to make a decision to refocus, which is what I'm asking you to do." All Marina could say was, and then they chatted about nothing until it was time to go to bed. As she fell asleep, she thought she was stupid for choosing a smart husband. She liked her lovers better because they were dumb, which meant that no matter how many times they smothered her or she called them daddy in the bedroom, she was in charge and they came running at her call. Elliot would never engage in such nonsense. Even though he was a desk jockey, he was a real man, always going out in search of the good things in life, whether it was hunting a mammoth or killing invaders. The next morning, Elliot looked in the mirror. A few gray spots, a small belly, and his writer's uniform, polo shirt and slacks, met his gaze. It was time to go on a diet, maybe run a couple miles on the weekends, and maybe even spend time at one of his least favorite places, the gym. Marina called later that day to tell him that she had been promoted at the nature center and was now the manager of charitable donations, which would require her to spend more time in the office, but in time she might become one of the movers and shakers in the volunteer world. Elliot called to congratulate her and said they should go out to eat to celebrate. "No, not tonight, please," Marina said. "I'll be here late." On its own, this would not have bothered Elliot, a programmer psychologist who read the signs embedded in the human mind as easily as he navigated a traffic light. Over the course of that week, however, layers began to form that led to the inevitable conclusion. The tight outfits returned, as did the reticence, and then he noticed the secretiveness in her. She stopped using her regular phone at home, leaving it open so he could only look at work emails. She was withdrawing more cash from ATMs, it seemed, because she was paying less by card. Over the years, Elliot had caught quite a few scammers, but of a very different kind. If one of his subcontractors started billing more hours, a client didn't call for months, or a supplier insisted they get a different brand at the same price, he knew he could rely on the one truth in all human thinking: every cause has an effect, like a match starting a fire. Even though each effect may have several potential causes, a fire can be fanned by a lighter, a lightning bolt, or a magnifying glass. He traced the link between effect and cause by asking the simple question, why? Why did it take a new brand, he asked. Well, it's more available, they answered. Is the other one still available? Why can't we use this one? In each case, he discovered that for the other party, the interaction with his firm was no longer an end in itself, beneficial to both parties, but a means to an end, usually increasing their profits or making their jobs easier at the expense of the end product, the companies involved and, inevitably, the little people, i.e., the customers. However, in the case of adultery, the why was a common behavior that was used to disguise infidelity. It meant showing up where he wasn't expected, when he wasn't supposed to be there. His secret weapon was Kayla, a teenager from a house 4 doors down who wanted to make some extra money and, being a bit of a schoolgirl who hoped to be a veterinarian someday, could be home at almost any hour of the day or evening and watch the kids for a relatively small fee, which he supplemented with generous tips. The next time his wife was delayed at the nature center, he called Kayla, then drove there, then called back. The usual: she just left or she had business to attend to. They were all aware of it, but he needed proof. Such important and permanent decisions required certainty. Since the nature center was half a mile off the highway, surrounded by dense forest, he couldn't check to see if her car was parked there without alerting her to his suspicions. Instead, he went to the next girls' night out, but found the kitty cat lounge empty. He called again and asked to find a customer named Marina Smalling, but the bartender quickly told him that the band had just left. In this case, it was without subterfuge. When he returned the following week, he saw that the cars had left in just under an hour. This led him to follow each car in turn for the next few weeks, discovering a secret world. Xenotation spot Sandra quickly made her way to the cheaper part of town, where she met several other women, who as a group hid in a back bedroom. Despite the binoculars she'd bought, Elliot couldn't see what happened next, but he could guess. Xenotation spot Emily went straight to the outskirts of the college campus on the north side of town, where she was clearly visible through the window of her second-floor apartment, clearly enjoying the effects of the hookah she and her friends were consuming like oxygen long-distance runners. The only change in her diet was XXL pizza for meat lovers. Xenotation spot Daisy led him down the winding freeways leading to the communities surrounding their town, finally stopping at a well-kept trailer where, judging by the sounds coming from inside, they were holding some sort of seance. Elliot hurried to get out of there in case they were going to successfully summon a demon. Xenotation spot Linda traveled on foot to a warehouse nearby. Peering through the dusty windows, Elliot saw that the whole thing looked like a business meeting and assumed that Linda was launching a career to separate herself from her husband. Xenotation spot Marina drove straight up to the town mall, parked, and went inside. Elliot suspected a trap and a ruse, so he drove to the exit on the far side instead and wasn't surprised to see Marina get out and get into the waiting car. He followed her to the nature center and then turned home in disgust to pay Kayla and reinforce his doubts with the glass of bourbon he'd downed late that night. At this point, he thought, the initial interview had yielded valuable data. Girls' night out was nothing more than a mutual cover-up of the secret lives of bored but intelligent suburban housewives. At this point, Elliot realized that additional surveillance would be required. For $1,000, he picked up an old Nissan at a car lot. Mechanically, it was still serviceable, though it made all sorts of groans and rumbles when he drove it. But even better, it had poorly tinted windows that were excessively dark. Perfect for surveillance. He intended to catch her using his method of being in the wrong place at the wrong time to see what she was hiding. He noticed that Marina was attentive when he talked about the big project coming up this week and made sure to mention that he would be late on Thursday and Friday. That Thursday afternoon he picked up work from the office, parked on the street and waited. Postmodern scammers are ironically afraid of motels where they don't talk, because even the worst of them now have video surveillance and keep records. You may be able to pay cash, but you'll have to show ID, and that creates a paper trail. Wealthy people rent second apartments and party there, but the frugal ones, like his wife, have to use their own homes or workplaces. When he walked into the house a few hours later, parking his second car at work and heading home in his regular car, he decided it was worth giving her one last chance. If she confessed and was genuinely remorseful, could he take her back? Logically speaking, he could. It would save a lot of money. Logically, he couldn't. Betrayal ends love and reduces it to infatuation, because at that moment you realize that it has become one-sided, making the lover pathetic and the beloved strong, which suggests dominance and cruelty. "I've been thinking," he said. "We, meaning you and I, seem to have gotten a little weathered lately. We should recharge, maybe go out this Saturday night." Marina turned pale. "I'd rather have takeout and watch a movie with the kids." "I can get a babysitter," Elliot said. "Come on, just you and me, just like old times. That will keep this marriage alive for us. I don't see you anymore, and we make love once a week at best. We're drifting apart, and I know it's partly because I spend so much time at work, but I feel like you're drifting away from me too. There's nothing wrong with us. I just need some time alone," she said, put down the magazine she was reading, and left the room. At this point, Elliot realized that his marriage was in deep trouble. As a consequence, he was sitting in the little Nissan for the second night, dozing off because his troubled mind wouldn't let him sleep soundly, when a car appeared on the street. It was covered in stickers for legal pot, supporting our troops, free markets, democracy, gay rights, Christianity, and patriotism. He moved uncertainly down the street, then hesitantly drove up to the house, made a quick turn and parked in the garage. His garage. Elliot waited half an hour, then took the graphite spray from the glove compartment and went to the back door. He sprayed the hinges and the lock and opened it with the key, noting how silently it moved. He crept into the living room, and that's when he heard sounds coming from upstairs. Afterward, Elliot, who apparently wasn't worried about his broken heart, his children, or the future of his marriage, curled up on the back steps and drank bourbon on the rocks in a large plastic cup. He figured that since all the men in the stories of outraged husbands on the internet got drunk as fish after finding out, he'd give it a try, but it turned out he had no enthusiasm for anything but the general pain-relieving properties of alcohol. The leg and back pain from sitting in the car for so long was gone, but his heart remained leaden. At that moment, the thought of The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, written by Australian nurse Bronnie Ware, flashed through his mind. Zenotation spot. I wish I had the courage to truly live my life, not the way others expect me to. Zenotation spot. I wouldn't want to work so hard. Zenotation spot. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Zenotation spot. I regret not keeping in touch with my friends. Zenotation spot. I would like to allow myself to be happier and realize that happiness is a choice. Happiness is a choice, he muttered. He could choose to be happy despite a marriage that, whether divorced or reconciled, would take away half his fortune. But to live in harmony with himself? That would be difficult. A dead marriage, like cuckoldry, made a man a failure. It undermined his self-esteem and made him question his own judgment. He couldn't be true to himself and save his marriage at the same time, but neither could he have both self-esteem and a divorce that would alienate his children. Elliot made the decision that most men statistically make in the event of infidelity. He would ignore her and go on with his life for the sake of the children. In his opinion, what had Unc? Even a wonderful marriage had become normal because Marina was getting a greater self-esteem boost from her volunteer work than from being just another one of the bourgeois suburbanites who were just trying to live a normal life. She needed something symbolic, like waving a flag in a Bible, to seem superior to the rest of us, and she found it in working at a nature center, fighting climate change, and caring for the lives of little people. Too bad she forgot about the little people, he thought, looking at his children playing in the living room and their need for a normal life. As an advertising man, Elliot distrusted ideology because he saw it also as a form of advertising. For him, life was simple: find good people and make sure they have the resources to do good things, shut out the bad ones and ignore the rest because they are faceless non-player characters who will at best ruin your life with their incompetence and at worst ruin it for the momentary pleasure of dominating someone. "So, is everything all right?" asked Marina to him. "We're fine," Elliot said carefully, stretching the last word to make it clear that this was not an endorsement, but an assessment of the minimum. His wife didn't care. Good, she said half-heartedly and walked out the door, ostensibly to change the oil in the car, but more likely to meet her lover and heal her open wounds. Elliot growled, then stopped suddenly with a finality that discouraged him at first. He no longer cared. It wasn't the woman he loved who had betrayed him, she was another obstacle in life's path, like a leaky roof or paying taxes, that stood in his way between where he was now and where he wanted to be. And so life went on. For the next 7 years, Elliot Smalling did what he always did: go to work, mow the yard, fix what broke around the house, and spend time with his kids. He bought an old MG on an internet board, rebuilt the engine and transmission, and then tackled the body and interior parts. From that point on, he never had sexual relations with his wife. He saw this as an inevitable consequence not of his wife's infidelity, but of her low regard for him, as evidenced by her past and ongoing infidelities. This, in turn, led him to become disgusted with her. Most marriages affected by infidelity end this way. Divorce is too expensive and devastating to the children, so the couple continues to be husband and wife in name and picture only, but live separately. They push away from each other where they were once drawn to each other. Eventually the children leave and the parents separate. The spouse, caught off guard by the other's infidelity, does everything he or she can to keep life normal for the children, which means lying to everyone else. However, children are rarely fooled for long, and there are consequences that last throughout adulthood. Zenotation spot. For example, Dale, an intelligent boy who once dreamed of becoming a neurosurgeon, went to college, dropped out, and became a bartender. His weekends were spent mountain biking and going to see hipster indie bands perform, but mostly he drank. He was known for his witty, lively barroom conversations, but at the end of the night, when the buzz wore off and the depths of drunkenness set in, he would express the opinion at the heart of his worldview that you shouldn't strive for much because it would all be taken away anyway. Zenotation spot. Chris, the middle child, went off to college in California. There he began experimenting with drugs and never looked back. At last count, he was living in a mountain community near San Francisco, where indica cannabis grew on 40-foot trees, acid was synthesized from morning glory seeds, and outsiders disappeared without a trace. He took an even simpler viewpoint: life is essentially over by the time you're 40, so live now and worry about everything else later, because it probably doesn't matter what you do, it's probably going to turn out badly in the end anyway. Zenotation spot. Elizabeth, a daughter characterized by worldly acumen, never went to college. At 16, she left home for a week and disappeared at 18. After that, a trail of bad luck followed her: promiscuous affairs, DUI arrests, shoplifting, drug overdoses, and jilted lovers in a dozen states. When her diary was read after her death from a sleeping pill overdose, she suggested that nothing made sense because other people were an unknowable alien world, and she would rather die untouched in her mind than be tied to any person, job, place, or role. Back from the funeral, Elliot sat alone in his darkened office, staring at the wall. He knew divorce was awful because all the kids from divorced families end up on drugs or parole. It turned out that reconciliation could be even worse because the blatant fact of a loveless marriage made everyone in the house so nervous that almost no one could function. His children were paying the price for their mother's actions and their father's legal inability to do anything about it. He decided that instead of waiting for his life to end with regret as his wife demanded, he would act, but because he was an avid planner, he carefully organized his actions. "Hello?" Marina answered the phone a few days later. "It's Elliot," the voice said. "Your husband. Listen, an opportunity came up and I moved the company to San Jose. I live here now, and I wanted to give you the address." "It's not a good time," Marina said. "We're about to start the Revolution for Mother Earth ceremony on the 4th of July, and I'm selling t-shirts. Just email them to me." "Okay," Elliot said and hung up. He never sent the email. Marina gave little thought to the exchange. She was self-sufficient, with her job and volunteer work, so it didn't matter to her in terms of comfort and convenience where her husband lived and what he did. As it was, she hardly saw him during the week, and never at all on weekends when the children were away from home. Not surprisingly, a decade passed during which Marina hardly remembered her husband. That came to an end when her old friend Linda caught her off guard at the nature center one afternoon. Linda, once a slender blonde, now took on the willowy but contented look of a woman aging without much regret. She placed the phone on the table and greeted Marina. "Long time no see, old buddy," she said, hugging her. "How have you been?" "Oh, great, just great," Marina said enthusiastically. "It's been years. Last time I checked, you had just broken up with Ralph, or David, or whatever his name was, your ex. I woke up one morning to find all his stuff gone and I got a text message saying he was rediscovering himself in Nepal," Linda says. "I just went on with my business, found a new man, and now I'm moving to California." This should have alerted Marina, but it didn't. Such is the price of solipsism, or the belief that, because we perceive the world through ourselves, it is within us and directed at us, instead of the merciless truth that it is impartial and impersonal, like death and the randomness of lightning. "Mine just moved to San Jose," Marina announced cheerfully. "He found new business there after the economic downturn here. I guess he never forgave me for what we did on those girls' night outs." They both laughed. "You were with, what was his name?" "Steve?" Linda asked. Marina blushed. "Gabe was there," she said. "Then Steve. Then Oliver." Then she went over the names on her fingers: Rodolfo, Vicente, Trayshawn, Raphael, and Angelica. "Oh my," Linda said, smiling. "Angelica. I didn't realize that. Well, good for you. I see you're the assistant director at the Nature Center now." "Yes, it's the center of my life," Marina says. "When I got tired of being what everyone expects me to be, I switched to the role of a person changing the course of history." "You're encouraging us all," Linda said. Then quickly said, "Do you think I've messed up my marriage?" "No," Marina said. "You have to do what is right for you," she said, nudging her friend lightly. "Is the new guy treating you well?" "Like a queen," Linda said. "Or maybe just a battle buddy, here and there. He was very good to me. We had a couple other kids." They talked a little about other things, promised to contact each other again without thinking it would happen, and then happily parted. As they left, Linda stopped the recording on her phone, saved it and turned the device off, then got into her car and drove down the long, winding highway that led out of town. Only a few weeks later, Marina found an eviction notice on her door. She called the bank, burning with righteous anger, but backed off when she learned that there had been no payments for 2 years. When she checked her accounts, she found a nominal paycheck from the Nature Center, but nothing from her husband. In a rage, she grabbed the phone and called him. "I'm sorry, dear," he muttered. "They made me leave the company. I lost my apartment and I'm living in a van by the river. What about all that money you've made over the years?" Marina gritted her teeth. "We spent it all," he said. "There's nothing left." "How can that be?" she asked. "Haven't you noticed?" "What about your 401k? "I tried," he said. "I can't account for much because I've never seen a receipt from you, and you've been running up your own credit cards. I'm filing for bankruptcy soon, but I have nothing and no one will hire me here because I'm too old. I put a 401k into a company years ago, believing I would have capital. And now I have nothing," he almost sobbed. "What the hell about me?" She hissed into the receiver, then pressed the end call button with force. Turning around the room, she realized in a flash the predicament she found herself in. Her salary was meant for people of wealth to recognize their services, and she had always spent it on clothes, food, hotel rooms, and Amazons. She sighed. After calling her friend, an apartment broker, Marina began packing her things. Only later did she find out about the reverse mortgage and how much money she would owe monthly on the house, which for some reason was in her name only and had belonged to her for decades. Back in San Jose, where bright sunlight warmed the light breeze, Elliot opened his phone and removed the SIM card, holding it in the microwave for a dozen seconds before sending it to the wastebasket. The recording Linda had made was stored on another device, and he listened to it periodically to remind himself why he'd chosen this particular course of action. "Done," he said, and the hall erupted in cheers of approval. Who were these new people who filled a life that had been dead for so long? After his daughter's death, Elliot realized 2 things. First, that work had eaten up his life before Marina took what was left, and second, that his 2 children were still alive and he needed to devote his time to them. It was time to break up the marriage as it had not lived up to the expectations of his sons and daughter. He took out a reverse mortgage on the house in her name, getting her to sign on the dotted line during their weekly pretend family meetings, and then transferred the house to her. He gave up more than half of it, but still got cash on hand, which he used to buy a number of luxury items that could be mortgaged, exchanged, or sold for cash. The cash turned into used gold jewelry, which he buried in boxes all over the woods in places marked only on the GPS app on his second phone. Then he cut his workday short and got in his car to visit his sons, who were skeptical at first, then resentful, but after a few months broke down and told him everything. At last they spoke of what they kept inside them, of the poison that was eating away at their will to be. About the empty house and the alien silence between their parents. Knowing by the time they moved on to middle school that their mother had extracurricular activities, they kept their mouths shut while their father tried unsuccessfully to hold it all together. After a while, they gave up on a world that never made sense to them and sank into distractions and intoxication, finding themselves in a vicious cycle, afraid to leave it lest whatever they would create be destroyed like their birth family had been destroyed. Your mother always felt ill at ease and longed for her first love, Jean, their father said. I could never compete with her, and so when she started to feel the sting of aging, she gave in to her worst urges and went a little crazy. Casual sex and dating does this to people. Just as you always compare your spouse to former lovers, you will always think the grass is greener elsewhere. Find a virgin, or as close to one as you can get, and get a prenup. Let's go for a walk in the hills. After living with their father for a few more months, the boys began to go back to the way things were years ago, and their growing up began anew. He told them how to become adults and sensible people, since he himself had already realized that sanity was rare and his wife was not an aberration but one unfortunate variant of a tragically commonplace norm. You want your heart to lead you to your cock, not the other way around, he used to say. Find someone who wants your soul, and the body will come on its own. Who cares how good the sex is? You will get pleasure either way. That's the beauty of the male sex. Women only care about sex because they think they have to. Make her believe she's the best she can be. Within a few years, both sons had earned degrees or certificates, owned their own businesses, and were seriously dating women who were, in their father's opinion, poised and stable young women. Now they listened to his words in a way they hadn't since they were little boys, and felt hopeful that a promising life loomed ahead for the child. As Elliot was on the phone with his wife, he looked up and saw a room filled with his 2 surviving children, their spouses, and 7 young men who would become the next generation. It was as if his wife had self-liquidated and events flowed around her like a river. After hiring a forensic accountant at great expense, Marina found out that everything he had said was true. He no longer owned the company or had any assets. He had spent everything he earned, accomplished nothing, and simply stopped paying on the house. He had transferred his share of the company to his sons and seemed to have transferred other wealth in a form that the monetary system couldn't track, such as precious metals, but as her lawyer had said, he had no reason to expect a divorce, so it was perfectly legal. Marina didn't know any of this, only that the money was gone and there was nothing she could do. Her lawyer pointed out that he had never sought a divorce despite her infidelity and that it was against the law to make poor financial decisions. Besides, you're the one hiding the receipts, he said. Just get him to sign the divorce papers and move on with your life. When she sent the papers, he signed them and asked a homeless charity to send them back in exchange for a substantial donation. He then married Linda and adopted his 2 children, who by then were in their teens and planning to take over the family business. All his money went to his 4 children. Sometimes he returned to his old town to visit Elizabeth's grave. He would tell her he was sorry, but he had little choice. Divorce or reconciliation ended the same way for the children, so he lived in a loveless marriage for decades, trying to provide them with the best of everything, but it wasn't enough. He thought of Elizabeth often. So did his sons, who came to the dismal tombstone with their children and new half-brothers and sisters they were excited to meet. Marina continued to work. She had a long and illustrious career at the Nature Center, but when she turned 65, a new director came in and quickly laid off the old staff. The new way of doing charity work, which was non-profit but paid well in salaries and consulting services, was going to be completely corporate, and they couldn't have those smelly old hippie anarchists selling t-shirts like greedy capitalists in a patchouli haze. The gift store was gone, replaced by the annual giving office, and the staff donned suits and ties. Her lovers had long since scattered. When she was younger, her body had seduced them. As she aged, they saw nothing special in her. Their interest was purely on means, since all they wanted was sexual contact without responsibility, consequences, or long-term maintenance. Her children never called, and when she got lonely and called Elliot to chat, the number was out of service. She eventually became addicted to gin and spent several wonderful years of painless and carefree blissful intoxication until her liver suddenly failed on Christmas morning. Linda received the call and went to take care of her friend's affairs. Since she was listed as the emergency contact and Marina had no other relatives to answer the call. The contents of the apartment went to Goodwill, the 2-decades-old car went to the dealer, and the remaining house debt was written off since Marina had no assets other than her Social Security checks. Linda was alone at the memorial service and brought the ashes back to California. 3 nights later, under a full moon, a small group of young people gathered on a bluff above the Pacific Ocean. Marina's grandchildren felt an unquenchable rage at her for destroying their family, and took turns urinating in their grandmother's urn and throwing it over the cliff into the ocean. Then they returned to their full and meaningful lives, with no thoughts of the one whose terrible decisions had jeopardized their future and even their very existence so many years ago.